I've just recently finished reading Norwegian Wood by Haruki Murakami. It's a very popular book with people who are interested in Japan. So if you're interested in Japan or if you've been to Japan, you've probably heard of it already. I've been living in Japan for a while, but I've been avoiding reading Japanese literature so far because my Japanese isn't good enough to read anything in the original. And I'm always hesitant to read a book in translation because I feel like you're not really reading the author, you're reading the translator. At least this is what I always think before starting a book. But then once I start the book and once I get into it, I get so absorbed in it that I usually forget it's translated. It's good to read the literature of a country you're living in if you're an expat, because it helps you to really understand the people. Even after so many years in Japan, sometimes all the foreignness of it, all the school uniforms, all these codes of politeness, all this emphasis on uniformity, it can make me think sometimes that Japanese people don't have the same range of emotions we do. The thing that struck me about reading this book, though, was how much I could identify with the main character. He seemed to go through life without knowing what he was doing. He took classes at university without a clear goal for the future, and he got into relationships without knowing what he wanted out of them or where he wanted them to go. I thought, man, that is me. Also, his description of turning 20 reminded me exactly how I had felt at the same time when I was turning 20. He said that first he was 18, and then he became 19, and it seemed like the natural thing to do was to go back to being 18 again. Turning 20 seemed inconceivable. I'm paraphrasing because I don't have a copy of the book with me, but that's the sentiment, and that was exactly the same way I felt at 19. It was just like this huge jump to turn 20. Also, the description of dorm life reminded me of my life in the dormitories. The way jokes are often made about another person's personality quirks when that person is absent, and how certain people can supply the rest of the dormitory with endless amusement. Also, the sanitary conditions in the men's dorm room, or lack thereof, reminded me of my own living arrangements. He talks a lot in the book about what a mess their dorms were. The funny thing is, now I've got an apartment in Japan, and whenever a Japanese person sees my apartment, they say, "Wow, are all Americans this messy, or is it just you?" I try to say it's just me, but according to Norwegian Wood, sounds like young Japanese people living on their own are just as messy. That's the impression you get from the book, the description of the dormitories. I'm rambling a little bit here. Sorry about that. Too much coffee. But a couple other points. Just for a kind of a counter view, I had a Japanese friend who also read this book recently and didn't like it. She said that there was too much sex in it, and in fact, she felt like it almost read like one of those, paperback pornographies at some points. She thought the women characters in the book all seemed unrealistic. There weren't any real women. It's just what the men wished women would be like. And I kind of could see that a little bit. The character of Midori did kind of seem like more of a male fantasy of a girl than what a girl really is like. Also, she's being Japanese, so she read this book in the original Japanese, and she thought the author used unnecessary crude language. Apparently the way the narrator talks in the book, the main character talks in the book, comes through a little bit crude in the original Japanese, or a little bit abrupt and not very polite. I don't know. She asked me if there were anything I didn't like about the book. So the book was set in the 1960s in Japanese student dormitories, universities. during the time of the Japanese student movement, which was a big thing. That's a whole nother subject. But the main character is very cynical about the student movement and the student politics. And I don't like that cynicism. My sympathy is all with the student radicals. Now, when you try and do anything in this world, you're bound to kind of make mistakes and make it easy for people to criticize. So, you know, maybe some of the tactics or the rhetorical excess of the student movement, the narrator has an easy time criticizing it. But ultimately, you've got to try and do something in life. So I'm cynical about cynicism, to borrow a quote from a friend.